Picture this. It's January 1893, Fifth Avenue and 34th Street, New York City. The corner where the Empire State Building stands today, but right now, there are no skyscrapers, no tourists, no chaos. Just two brownstone mansions, side by side. And between them, a war. Not with guns, not with armies, but with something far more devastating in Gilded Age New York. Social power. One woman, one decision, one stubborn refusal to move. And in the process, she didn't just reshape a block. She relocated an entire social class. She forced every millionaire in Manhattan to abandon their palaces and flee north. She accidentally created the most famous hotel in America. And she proved something that echoes to this day, that even the most powerful people in the world cannot stop the march of change. This is the story of Caroline Astor, the woman they called the Mrs. Astor, the queen who ruled New York society with an iron fist wrapped in white gloves, the arbiter who decided which families mattered and which didn't, the hostess whose ballroom gave birth to the 400, the most exclusive social club in American history. But it's also the story of her downfall, because the same stubbornness that made her powerful made her vulnerable. And when her own nephew turned against her, she discovered that power has an expiration date. By the time she died in 1908, the world she'd built was already crumbling. Within 20 years, both of her mansions would be demolished, one replaced by a hotel, then the world's tallest building, the other by a synagogue, built by the very community she'd spent her life excluding from high society. The irony? She fled commercialization, and commercialization followed her. She ran from noise and change hunted her down. This is the story of how one woman's stubbornness started a war that changed Fifth Avenue forever.
To understand Caroline Astor, you need to understand where she came from, and more importantly, what she married into. Caroline Webster Schermerhorn, born September 22, 1830, into one of New York's oldest Dutch families. The Schermerhorns weren't the richest family in Manhattan, but they had something money couldn't buy in the 1830s: lineage. 3 generations of respected merchants, shipping, respectability, old New York blood. Think of it as the foundation, the pedigree, the credentials that would later become her weapon. But money, real money, that came from marriage. In 1853, at 22 years old, Caroline married William Backhouse Astor, Jr. And with that wedding, she didn't just change her name. She fused 2 kinds of power that Gilded Age America worshipped above all else: old blood and new money. Let that sink in for a moment. The Astor fortune, built by William's grandfather, John Jacob Astor, was already legendary. Fur trading, Manhattan real estate. By the time John Jacob died in 1848, he'd left behind an estate worth $20 to $30 million. In an era when a workman earned $1 a day, this was almost incomprehensible wealth. Some historians estimate he controlled nearly 1% of America's entire GDP at his death. That made him, arguably, the richest man America had ever seen. And now, through marriage, Caroline controlled access to that dynasty. But here's what they don't tell you about Caroline's early years as Mrs. Astor. She wasn't automatically the Mrs. Astor. There were other Astors, other wives, other women with the same last name competing for social dominance. For 2 decades after her marriage, Caroline was just one more wealthy woman in Manhattan. Comfortable, yes. Respected, certainly. But not yet the queen. That transformation would take time, strategy, and something Caroline possessed in abundance: patience. By the 1870s, something had shifted. Caroline, now in her 40s, had become Mrs. Astor, not Mrs. William Backhouse Astor, Jr., not Caroline Astor. Just Mrs. Astor, as if there were no other. How did she do it? Simple. She outlasted everyone. Her husband, William, had zero interest in society. He preferred yachts and his gentlemen's clubs. Her mother-in-law died. The competition faded. And Caroline stepped into the vacuum with ruthless precision. Her headquarters? A brownstone mansion at 350 Fifth Avenue, southwest corner of 34th Street. Now, by the standards of what would come later, the French chateaux, the marble palaces, the Fifth Avenue arms race, this house was almost modest. Red brick, brownstone trim, built in the 1850s and 1860s. On the outside, it looked more like a substantial townhouse than a palace. But inside, that's where Caroline built her empire. Imagine walking through those front doors on a January evening in 1880. You're not just entering a house, you're entering a gauntlet, a test. A series of rooms designed to remind you at every step exactly where you stand in the social hierarchy. The entrance hall opens to a procession of drawing rooms, French furniture, gilt mirrors, crimson silk wallpaper, old master paintings, or at least expensive copies. Every surface glittering with wealth, but tasteful wealth, old money wealth, not the flashy nouveau riche display of the Vanderbilts. Caroline hated that. No, this was restrained, controlled, the kind of luxury that whispered rather than shouted. And at the end of this procession, through a final set of doors, you reached the ballroom. Let me describe it for you. Roughly 40 by 60 feet, high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, parquet floors polished to a mirror shine, walls covered in paintings and tapestries, and along one wall a small orchestra platform where musicians would play waltzes and quadrilles until 3 in the morning. This room, this single room, could hold about 400 people. 400! Remember that number, because it's about to become legendary. Every queen needs a lieutenant, someone to do the dirty work, someone to say the things she can't say, someone to be the gatekeeper while she remains above the fray. For Caroline Astor, that someone was Ward McAllister. Picture him, a southern gentleman, somewhat portly, with elaborate whiskers and an even more elaborate sense of his own importance. He'd made a modest fortune in California and then decided his true calling was social organization. Yes, that was an actual job in Gilded Age New York. McAllister became Caroline's enforcer. He founded the Patriarchs, an exclusive group of 25 men who would host balls that determined who was in and who was out. He codified rules of etiquette. He advised new money families on how to dress, how to speak, how to decorate their homes in ways that wouldn't offend old money sensibilities. And most famously, he coined a phrase that would define an era: the 400. Here's the story everyone tells. In conversations with reporters, McAllister explained that there were only about 400 people in New York who truly mattered socially. Why 400? Because, he allegedly said, that's how many people could fit into Mrs. Astor's ballroom. Now, whether that math was accurate or not didn't really matter. The number stuck. The phrase entered the culture. And suddenly, every ambitious mother in Manhattan had one obsession: getting her family onto that list. For years, the exact names remained a mystery. McAllister and Caroline wielded the list like a sword, invisible but always present. You knew you were in if you received an invitation to Mrs. Astor's January ball. You knew you were out if the invitation never came. The power wasn't in the list itself. The power was in the not knowing. But then, in February 1892, something changed. The New York Times ran an article, "The Only 400." McAllister had finally revealed the names. And chaos erupted. Families who thought they were secure discovered they'd been excluded. Women who'd spent decades climbing the social ladder found their names missing. The backlash was immediate and brutal. McAllister became a figure of ridicule. His power, built on mystery, evaporated overnight. Caroline was furious. The list was supposed to be a weapon, not a public spectacle. McAllister had overplayed his hand. Within a few years, he'd be marginalized, a relic of a fading era. He died in 1895, largely forgotten. But for one glorious decade, he and Caroline had ruled New York society like monarchs of an invisible kingdom. Let's pause for a moment and imagine what it actually felt like to attend one of Mrs. Astor's balls. You receive your invitation weeks in advance. Heavy cream paper. Engraved calligraphy. The wording is simple, almost terse. Mrs. Astor requests the pleasure of your company. No need to say more. Everyone knows what this is. The day arrives. You spend hours preparing. If you're a woman, your dress might cost $5,000. That's roughly $180,000 in today's money. Silk, satin, beading, trains. You'll be judged on every detail, so you spare no expense. Your jewels are real, obviously. Emeralds, diamonds, sapphires. To wear anything less would be social suicide. If you're a man, you're slightly luckier. White tie, tails, patent leather shoes. But you still need to look the part. Groomed, polished, prosperous. You arrive at 350 Fifth Avenue around 10 p.m. The street outside is packed with carriages, dozens of them, all bearing the crests of New York's oldest families. The Schermerhorns, of course, the Livingstons, the Stuyvesants, old Dutch names mixed with new industrial money, the Havermeyers, the Bakers, the Sloanes. But not everyone. That's the point. The doors open, you're announced, and as you enter, there she is, Mrs. Astor. Typically standing at the entrance to the ballroom, receiving her guests like a queen holding court. She's in her 60s now, but still commanding. Black or dark blue gown, widows didn't wear bright colours, and William had died years ago. A stomacher of diamonds across her chest, pearls, a fan in one gloved hand, her hair styled severely, her expression neutral but watchful. You approach, you bow or curtsy. She extends her hand, not for a handshake, but to be kissed or gently held. She says something brief and formal. So glad you could attend. That's it. Nothing personal, nothing warm, just acknowledgement. And then you're through, into the ballroom, into the magic circle. The room is brilliant with light.
hundreds of candles in the chandeliers, later replaced by the new electric bulbs. The orchestra is playing a waltz, maybe Strauss, maybe Offenbach. The air smells of perfume, hot wax, and wealth. You dance, you gossip, you drink champagne and eat oysters. You see everyone who matters, and you studiously avoid acknowledging anyone who's here but shouldn't be. The occasional new money family given a trial invitation. Social climbers testing the waters. The ball lasts until 2 or 3 a.m., maybe later. Time bends differently when you're one of the 400. Because here, in this ballroom, on this night, you're not just wealthy or connected. You're consecrated, anointed, accepted. And Caroline Astor has granted you that acceptance. This was her power, not her money. Plenty of people had money. Not her lineage. Plenty of families had lineage. Her power was the ability to make people feel special, to make them believe that being in her ballroom meant they'd arrived at the pinnacle of American civilization. And for 30 years it worked. Until her nephew decided to destroy it all.
William Waldorf Astor was born in 1848 into privilege that most Americans couldn't imagine. He was the great-grandson of John Jacob Astor, the grandson of William Backhouse Astor Sr., the son of John Jacob Astor III, which made him Caroline's nephew by marriage. He was her husband's brother's son. Let me simplify that. He was the family heir. Now, William Waldorf had everything. Money, a fortune worth tens of millions by the 1880s. Education, Columbia Law School, extensive European travel, fluency in multiple languages. Ambition. He'd served in the New York State Assembly as minister to Italy under President Arthur, failed in a bid for Congress, but what he wanted most he couldn't have. Respect. Not the kind of respect that comes from money, not the kind that comes from titles or diplomatic postings, the kind of respect that Caroline wielded. Social respect. The power to open doors, to shape society, to be recognized as the head of the Astor dynasty. There was just one problem. Caroline. William Waldorf's father, John Jacob Astor III, died in 1890, which meant, by traditional rules of inheritance and family hierarchy, that William Waldorf was now the senior male Astor, the head of the family, the patriarch. And his wife, Mary Dahlgren Paul Astor, should therefore become Mrs. Astor. Should. But Caroline had been Mrs. Astor for 20 years. She wasn't about to give up that title, not for her nephew, not for anyone. And so, with the kind of casual cruelty that only Gilded Age aristocrats could muster, Caroline made a decision. William Waldorf's wife would be called Mrs. William Waldorf Astor. The full name, all of it. Every syllable a reminder that she was junior, secondary, subordinate. Imagine how that felt. You're married to the richest young man in America. Your husband is the literal heir to the Astor Empire. You move in the highest circles. You have everything money can buy. But you can't have the one thing that matters in your world, the right name. William Waldorf was furious. His wife was humiliated. And Caroline? Caroline didn't even acknowledge there was a problem. As far as she was concerned, there was only one Mrs. Astor, and it wasn't some upstart in her 30s, married to a nephew with political ambitions. The battle lines were drawn. And William Waldorf Astor began plotting his revenge. Two houses, 15 feet apart, two branches of the same family. and between them a war about to ignite. William Waldorf couldn't defeat his aunt through society. That was her domain. He couldn't steal her title through force of personality. She'd spent 30 years building that power. But he understood something Caroline didn't. Something that would change Fifth Avenue forever. In the Gilded Age, there was one force more powerful than social approval. One force that could reshape entire neighborhoods, move mountains, destroy dynasties. Commerce. And William Waldorf Astor was about to weaponize it.